Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're taking a deep dive into the world of pharmaceuticals in Nepal. We've got market reports, expert analyses, historical stories, the whole shebang. You want to know how this market is doing, what it's up against, and what it's got going for it in the future. And here's the kicker. Nepal's journey with pharmaceuticals has had its ups and downs, but there's a lot we can learn from it, especially when we compare it to, let's say, Bangladesh.
It really is a fascinating case. Two countries, similar situations, but their pharmaceutical industries have taken really different paths.
So, in Nepal, where do things stand in their pharmaceutical market right now?
Well, the numbers are saying it's on track to hit 3.19 billion US dollars by 2025. And cancer drugs, those are expected to be the big movers. It sounds promising, doesn't it?
On the surface, yeah. But I bet there's more to it. What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Right, you are. There's always more to the story. Growth potential is one thing, but Nepal's pharma industry is facing a whole bunch of hurdles. Internally, think lack of skilled workers, jobs that aren't stable, high investment costs and those bank interest rates, employees' demands, lack of, teamwork and dedication. And get this, even pressure for donations from local villagers and political parties. It's complicated.
Wow, that's a lot to deal with, like building on shaky ground. And what about from outside? I'm guessing there are pressures from that side too?
You'd be guessing right. We're talking government policies and regulations, needing a drug import policy that's self-reliant, troubles getting raw materials and packaging in, restrictions and taxes on things coming from other countries, not enough help for production development, a marketing licensing system that seems like it's straight from Europe. And the process to get a manufacturing license takes forever. On top of that, you've got interference with technology and infrastructure compared to similar industries, and, oh yeah, no real system to control prices.
So it's not just struggles from within, it's pressure from the outside too. It's like trying to run a marathon with weights strapped to your ankles.
That's a good way to put it. And to add to that whole mix, there's no policy for sending out medicines they produce, not much support for what the local pharmaceutical industry actually needs, and keeping an eye on unethical practices. Not really happening as strongly as it should. Not a very rosy picture, is it?
Not exactly, but even in the roughest landscapes, there are some signs of, resilience. Our sources mentioned Nepal Drug Limited. They seem to be doing okay.
Oh yeah, Nepal Drug Limited. An interesting story. They actually started way back in 1973, but had to shut down around 2008, 2009 because of these good manufacturing practice provisions. GMP, they call it. It's a World Health Organization thing. Make sure production is up to snuff, quality and safety-wise.
So this GMP certification, it's a big deal in pharmaceuticals.
Big deal, absolutely. Think of it like a seal of approval. It means a company's meeting those international standards for quality and safety. No GMP certification. Tough to sell internationally. Tough to get into those global tenders.
What happened with Nepal Drug Limited then? Did they just throw in the towel when they had to shut down?
Not at all. They got back on their feet in 2017, and they've been making some real progress. Actually, they just got their GMP certification from the World Health Organization. Pretty significant, wouldn't you say? A real comeback story.
That's awesome. What are they making these days?
Right now, it's about 14 types of medicines. Things like oral rehydration salts, ORS, tablets and hemoglobin fluid. But they're not stopping there. They've got plans, big plans, to produce medicines for chronic conditions, cholesterol, sugar, blood pressure.
So they're looking to make a name for themselves in the Nepali market. It sounds like they could be a good example for other Nepali companies trying to make it big. But before we go too far down that road, I'm curious about this GMP thing. You said it helps companies sell internationally, get into those tenders. What kind of impact could that have on a company like Nepal Drug Limited?
It could change their whole game. Being able to export, it opens up all kinds of new markets, new ways to bring in money. And with the international tenders, now they're on the world stage competing. It could really raise their profile, their credibility. It's a step up for them, a big one. And it might even have a ripple effect, boost the whole Nepali pharmaceutical industry.
Interesting. It sounds like getting that GMP certification could be a major key for Nepali companies to, overcome some of those external challenges we talked about before. Kind of levels the playing field, gives them a shot to go up against the big players in the global market.
Exactly. And there's another interesting bit about Nepal Drug Limited, something that kind of shows us where the Nepali pharmaceutical industry came from. Back in the day, they were known for having these catchy brand names in Nepali, like Dentek and Fincoden.
Okay, now I'm curious. What was so special about those names?
Well, they had these ads, and the images, they really stuck with you. Dentek, they had a man hammering a nail into his tooth. Get it. Strong teeth. And for Fincoden, it was a man smoking a hookah, emphasizing the cough relief, you see.
Okay, those are some images. Not exactly what you'd see in a typical pharmaceutical ad these days, but yeah, I can see how they would have made an impact back then. It kind of reminds us that even with pharmaceuticals, marketing and branding, they matter.
For sure. And it speaks to the creativity and resourcefulness of those Nepali companies, even without a lot of resources, not great infrastructure. They had to find ways to stand out, connect with people.
So we've got potential for growth, but we've also got some serious roadblocks. And then there's Nepal Drug Limited, showing us it can be done. But what about the quality of medicines in Nepal overall? That's got to be a big concern, right?
It is, yeah. One of the big issues our sources brought up is how much influence pharmaceutical companies have over doctors. It gets a bit messy. See, these companies are using some pretty aggressive marketing to push doctors towards certain brands, even though in Nepal, all the medicines are generic.
Wait, hold on. All the medicines are generic. Why even bother pushing specific brands then? Doesn't make much sense.
You've hit a nerve there.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. This practice, it raises some ethical flags, sure, but it also tells us something about consumer awareness, or lack thereof, maybe.
You mean people are just taking whatever the doctor says without thinking about the cost or if there are cheaper options? Sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Exactly. And then you add on this dependence on imported active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, mostly from India and China. What happens if those supply chains break down? Nepal's pharmaceutical industry is going to be in a tight spot.
Okay, so Nepal's got a lot on its plate. But remember that comparison we talked about in the beginning, Nepal and their neighbor, Bangladesh. What's Bangladesh got to do with all of this?
That's where it gets really interesting.
But tell me more, I'm all ears.
So they're dealing with similar issues in terms of resources, infrastructure, you name it. But Bangladesh, they've become a real force in the pharmaceutical world. They're exporting medicines, coming up with new stuff, doing all the things Nepal is aiming for.
Wait, so how did they manage that? What's the secret ingredient here?
No single secret, really. It's more about having good strategies and being a little bold with policies. For example, they've got this system where if a manufacturer adds at least 20% value to an API they've imported, they get a 20% cash incentive. The impact has been really interesting to watch.
Okay, I'm following. How does that incentive actually work? What does it do?
Well, it encourages local manufacturers to go beyond just repackaging APIs they import. They're encouraged to put money into research and development, find ways to make those APIs more valuable, maybe by coming up with new formulations, new combinations.
So it's not just giving away money, it's encouraging innovation, becoming more self-sufficient. Nepal, take some notes, but really, how has that policy affected Bangladesh, especially with those aggressive marketing tactics we talked about?
You're asking the right questions. By encouraging local API production, Bangladesh has been able to rely less on imported APIs. That, in turn, has loosened the grip of those foreign pharmaceutical companies. It's a more level playing field now. Local companies can compete on the quality and price of their products. They don't have to rely on strong-arming doctors.
That's brilliant. It's a system that encourages healthy competition while looking out for the consumer. Anything else we can learn from Bangladesh's playbook?
There's this interesting fact about their status as an LDC, a least developed country. This gives them some advantages in international trade. And unlike Nepal, they've really used those to their advantage. It's about playing your cards right, you know?
Right, like knowing you've got an expert climber, a Sherpa, and actually letting them guide you. So if Nepal were to learn from Bangladesh, what would be the main takeaway?
If we step back and look at the bigger picture, it seems that embracing a free market, like Bangladesh did, could be a key factor. It's about healthy competition, which then leads to innovation, and that benefits everybody.
Okay, free market competition equals good. Got it. But a free market with no rules is just chaos, right? What about making sure things are done ethically, that quality is maintained?
You're bringing up a really important point. It's not just about having a free market. It's about a well-regulated free market. Bangladesh has got a solid regulatory system. It ensures quality control, prevents shady marketing practices. It's about striking a balance, competition and protecting the consumer.
So it's not one or the other. It's finding that sweet spot. Makes sense. But what about attracting investment? You mentioned FDI earlier.
Right, foreign direct investment. It's critical if you want to boost technological advancement, and Nepal really needs that. The tough part is, to get FDI, Nepal needs to improve its whole business environment, make it easier to do business there. Investors need to feel confident, secure before they're going to put their money in.
It's like choosing a mountain to climb, right? You want one with well-marked trails, good equipment. So are we saying Nepal needs to make itself more, what, investor-friendly?
That's definitely a major piece of the puzzle. And there's another interesting parallel with Bangladesh here. Remember how we talked about them adding value to APIs? That actually started with a patent waiver on a key ingredient.
Remind me how those patent waivers work. Don't they usually stifle innovation?
Sometimes, yeah. But in this case, the opposite happened. The waiver, it meant information about the ingredient was spread around. Bangladeshi companies could study it, figure out how it worked, and then they actually found ways to make it better. This is where the idea of TRIPS flexibilities comes in.
TRIPS flexibilities. That rings a bell. Break it down for me.
TRIPS is short for trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. Basically, it's a global agreement that sets the bar for protecting intellectual property, things like patents. But here's the catch. TRIPS also has some built-in flexibility. Countries, especially developing ones, have some wiggle room in how they put those standards in place. They can adapt the rules to fit their situation, their priorities, especially when it comes to public health.
So it's like having climbing gear you can adjust, right? You change it to match the terrain. How could Nepal use these TRIPS flexibilities to its advantage? I mean, specifically for their pharmaceutical industry, how could it work?
This is where things get really exciting. Think about it. Nepal could use these TRIPS flexibilities to give local companies the power to make more affordable generic medicines. They could even take it a step further and encourage the development of completely new treatments that tackle the specific health issues people in Nepal are facing.
Wow, so not just catching up, but becoming a leader in certain areas. That's a big change. Wouldn't that cause some problems with international pharmaceutical companies, though?
It's definitely a possibility. But remember, TRIPS flexibilities, they're a legitimate part of the agreement. It's about finding that balance, protecting intellectual property while making sure people have access to the medicines they need, especially in developing countries.
Okay, so it's a tightrope walk, but let's say Nepal does decide to go down this road. What would they gain?
The potential benefits are huge. First and foremost, it could make a world of difference for the Nepali people in terms of how affordable medicines are, how accessible they are. Imagine locally made, high-quality generic medicines readily available at a fraction of the cost of those imported brands.
Now, that would be a game changer. It would mean healthcare is available to everyone, not just those who can afford it.
Exactly. And beyond the affordability issue, there's the potential for economic growth. If Nepal can become a center for producing these specialized treatments, they could attract investment, create jobs, and boost the whole economy.
So it's a win-win situation. Affordable healthcare for the people, a boost to the economy. But let's be realistic for a second. There must be some downsides, some challenges, right? I mean, this sounds pretty complex.
You're right, it wouldn't be a walk in the park. If they're going to make this shift, it's going to take careful planning and execution. For one, they need to really strengthen their regulatory systems, make sure those locally produced medicines are safe, high quality.
Yeah, you don't want to sacrifice safety for affordability. That's a no-go. What kind of changes would they need to make to their regulations?
Well, for starters, they'd need to invest in their drug regulatory authority. Give them the money, the training, the equipment they need to properly monitor and enforce quality standards. They might even need to update their laws to be more in line with international best practices.
So it's not just about passing new laws, it's about making sure those laws actually work, that they're being enforced. Got it.
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of building up the local industry itself. Do they have the infrastructure, the skilled workers, the technological know-how to actually pull this off? These are crucial factors.
You're making good points. It's like getting ready for a big climb, right? You need the right equipment, the training, and a solid plan.
Precisely. And let's not forget the potential pushback from those international pharmaceutical companies. They're not going to be happy about losing market share. They've got a lot at stake.
So there could be some serious resistance to overcome, like navigating a treacherous mountain pass. You never know what obstacles you might run into along the way. But even with those challenges, the potential benefits, they're huge.
They really are. And this isn't just about Nepal. This situation brings up some bigger questions about global health equity, about the role of intellectual property rights in making sure everyone has access to the medicines they need. It's a debate happening all over the world. And Nepal's experience, it could provide some valuable insights.
So we've gone from Nepal's specific challenges to this global conversation about healthcare access. That's quite a journey. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's come back to Nepal. What are some tangible steps they could take, things they could actually do to move towards using those TRIPS flexibilities and boosting their pharmaceutical industry?
Well, a good place to start would be to really assess what they've already got, figure out where they need to build up their capacity.
Okay, so taking stock of the situation, kind of like checking your gear before a climb.
Yeah.
What would that assessment actually involve?
It means looking at their manufacturing infrastructure, seeing what's there. It means evaluating the skills and training of their workforce, analyzing what they're capable of in terms of research and development. It's all about knowing your strengths and weaknesses so you can make a plan, fill in the gaps.
So it's about understanding where they are right now so they can figure out how to get where they want to be?
Exactly. And while they're doing that assessment, they should start talking to the different players involved, both in Nepal and internationally. We're talking government agencies, local pharma companies, research institutions, even international organizations like the WHO.
Building a team, a coalition, right?
Exactly. And these conversations, they're crucial for sharing what everyone knows, getting everyone on the same page, creating a vision for the future of the industry. Get everyone around the table, talk about the challenges, look for solutions, figure out how to move forward together.
So like drawing a map, plotting a course to the top of that pharmaceutical mountain. And I imagine these conversations could also help with that pushback we were talking about from the international pharma companies.
Exactly. If they're open and transparent in these dialogues, they can address those concerns, find common ground, maybe even turn those companies from opponents into partners.
Okay, so Nepal's got a tough climb ahead, but if they play their cards right, they could reach some pretty impressive heights. We've covered a lot, market projections, quality control, and this whole fascinating concept of TRIPS flexibilities. What stands out to you as the most important thing we've learned so far?
I think what really strikes me is Nepal's potential. They could not only overcome these challenges, but they could actually become a leader in the movement towards making sure everyone has access to medicine.
That's a powerful thought. It's not just about fixing their own problems, it's about being part of a global solution.
Exactly. If they use those TRIPS flexibilities strategically, invest in their local industry, and create a free market with the right regulations, they could become a model for other countries to learn from to adapt to their own situations.
So it's not just about Nepal's journey, it's about the impact their success could have on the whole global pharmaceutical landscape.
You got it. And that's what makes this whole story so compelling.
I agree. Let's take a step back for a moment and look at the big picture. What are the key takeaways for our listeners as they continue to explore this market?
Great question. Let's try to sum up the essence of what we've uncovered. So far, we've seen that Nepal's pharmaceutical market, it's got potential, it's on track for growth, but there are a lot of challenges, both internal and external. It's a bit like trying to bake a cake, but with one hand tied behind your back.
That's a pretty good analogy. Skilled workforce shortages, high investment costs, government regulations. Sounds like they're dealing with a lot.
Exactly. But even with all that, there are some bright spots. Nepal Drug Limited, they're a good example. They got that GMP certification from the WHO, and that really shows us that Nepali companies, they can meet international standards. They can compete on a global level.
Right. It's like they planted a flag on the mountaintop, showing everyone it's possible to overcome those obstacles.
Mhm.
But we also talked about that quality control issue and the influence pharmaceutical companies have over doctors. Not exactly ideal for a healthy market.
Definitely not. And that brings us back to that comparison with Bangladesh we talked about. Similar socioeconomic situations, but Bangladesh, they've managed to become a real powerhouse in the pharmaceutical world. They're exporting medicines, they're innovating, basically doing everything Nepal is trying to do.
So they figured out how to climb that mountain, set up camp, and even start a garden up there. What's their secret?
It's not really a secret, it's more like a different way of thinking. They've used their LDC status, least developed country, to get those trade benefits, something Nepal hasn't really done. And they've really embraced the free market approach, encouraging competition, which we know can lead to innovation, make things more affordable.
Free market. Got it. But you mentioned something earlier, TRIPS flexibilities, I think. That sounded interesting. What's that all about?
Right, TRIPS. It stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. It's this international agreement. It sets the minimum standards for how you protect intellectual property.
Ah, okay, patents and all that. So where does the flexibility come in?
That's the interesting part. TRIP flexibilities, they give countries, especially developing countries, a little bit of leeway in how they implement those standards. They can adapt the rules to fit their situation, their priorities, especially when it comes to things like public health.
So it's like having climbing gear you can adjust, right? You change it to suit the terrain you're dealing with. How could Nepal use these TRIPS flexibilities to their advantage? Specifically in their pharmaceutical industry, how would it work?
Now, this is where it gets really exciting. Imagine this. Nepal could use these TRIPS flexibilities to empower their local companies to produce more affordable generic medicines. And they could even go further. They could encourage the development of completely new treatments that are specifically designed for the health challenges people in Nepal are facing.
Wow. So they could not only catch up, but actually become a leader in certain areas.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift. But wouldn't that upset the big international pharmaceutical companies?
It might, yeah. But we have to remember that TRIPS flexibilities, they're a legitimate part of the agreement. It's about finding that balance, protecting intellectual property while ensuring that people have access to the medicines they need, especially in developing countries.
So it's a balancing act. But let's say Nepal does decide to go down this path. What would be the benefits for them?
The benefits could be significant. First of all, think about what it would mean for the people in Nepal. Imagine high-quality generic medicines made locally, available at a fraction of the cost of those imported brands.
That would be a game changer. It would make healthcare accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. And wouldn't that also address that problem we talked about with doctors being pressured to prescribe certain brands?
Absolutely. When you have affordable generics available, there's less incentive for those pharmaceutical companies to use those aggressive marketing tactics. Doctors and patients can make decisions based on what's best for their health, not based on marketing pressure.
So it's not just about the price of the medicine, it's about making the whole healthcare system healthier. That's really important.
It is. And beyond affordability, there's the potential for economic growth. If Nepal could become a hub for producing specialized treatments, that could bring in investment, create jobs, and boost the entire economy.
A win-win situation then. Affordable healthcare for the people and a boost to the economy. But let's be realistic. There must be some downsides, some challenges involved, right? I mean, this is a pretty ambitious undertaking.
You're right, it's not going to be easy. Implementing this kind of change requires careful planning and execution. For one thing, they would need to strengthen their regulatory mechanisms, make sure those locally produced medicines are safe and high quality.
Right, you don't want to compromise safety for the sake of affordability. That's not an option. What kind of changes would they need to make to their regulations?
Well, they would need to invest more in their drug regulatory authority, give them the resources, the training, the equipment they need to properly monitor and enforce quality standards. And they might need to update their laws to match those international best practices we talked about.
So it's not just about new laws, it's about making sure those laws are effective, that they're being followed.
Precisely. And then there's the challenge of building up the capacity of the local industry itself. Do they have the infrastructure, the skilled workforce, the technology? Those are critical factors.
Good points. It's like preparing for a difficult climb. You need the right gear, the training, and a solid plan.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the potential pushback from those international pharmaceutical companies. They're not going to be happy about losing market share. They've got a lot to lose.
So there could be some resistance along the way, like navigating a dangerous mountain pass. You never know what obstacles you might encounter. But even with all those challenges, the potential benefits are huge.
They are. And this situation brings up some bigger issues that go beyond Nepal. We're talking about global health equity, the role of intellectual property rights in ensuring everyone has access to medicine. It's a global conversation, and Nepal's experience could be very valuable in that conversation.
So we've gone from talking about Nepal's challenges to a global discussion about access to healthcare. That's quite a shift. But let's bring it back to Nepal for a moment. What are some concrete steps they could take to move in this direction towards using those TRIPS flexibilities and strengthening their pharmaceutical industry?
Well, they should start by taking a good look at what they've got, a thorough assessment of their existing capabilities. Figure out where they need to build up their capacity.
So taking inventory, like checking your gear before a climb, what would that assessment look like?
It would involve evaluating their manufacturing infrastructure, what they've got in place. They'd need to assess the skills and training of their workforce, analyze their research and development capabilities. It's about knowing what you're good at and where you need to improve so you can make a plan, address those weaknesses.
So understanding where they are now so they can figure out how to get to where they want to be.
Right. And while they're doing that assessment, they should start talking to all the different players involved, both domestically and internationally. Talk to government agencies, local pharmaceutical companies, research institutions, international organizations like the WHO.
Building a strong team, a coalition of the willing. What would be the purpose of these conversations?
These conversations are all about sharing knowledge, building consensus, developing a shared vision for the future of the industry. It's about bringing everyone to the table, talking about the challenges, exploring the possible solutions, and working together to find a path forward.
So, crafting a roadmap, charting a course towards that pharmaceutical summit. And I imagine those conversations could also be helpful in dealing with potential pushback from those international pharmaceutical companies.
Absolutely. By being open and transparent in these dialogues, they can address concerns, find common ground, maybe even turn those companies into partners instead of competitors.
Okay, so Nepal's got a challenging climb ahead, but with the right approach, they could reach new heights. We've covered a lot of ground, from market projections to quality control to this fascinating concept of TRIPS flexibilities. What do you think is the most important takeaway from our discussion so far?
I think the most striking thing is Nepal's potential. They could not only overcome their challenges, but they could actually become a leader in this global movement towards more equitable access to medicines.
That's a powerful thought. It's not just about solving their own problems, it's about being part of a global solution.
Exactly. If they strategically utilize those TRIPS flexibilities, invest in their local industry, and foster a well-regulated free market, they could create a model for other countries to follow, a model they can adapt to their own situations.
So it's not just about Nepal's journey, it's about the ripple effects their success could have on the global pharmaceutical landscape.
Exactly. That's what makes this story so fascinating.
I agree. Before we wrap up, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What are the key takeaways for our listeners as they continue to explore this market?
That's a great point. Let's distill the essence of what we've explored.
Well, I think the main thing to remember is that Nepal's pharmaceutical industry, it's a mix of, challenges and opportunities. There's definitely potential for growth, but those hurdles, both internal and external, they're real. It's a climb, but a rewarding one, potentially.
Yeah, climb with obstacles for sure. And speaking of different paths, we can't forget about Bangladesh. They've really shown us that strategic planning, making bold policy decisions, that can really transform an industry from struggling to thriving.
Absolutely. Bangladesh's success, it shows how important it is to have a competitive market. Embrace the free market, but with the right regulations in place. That's how you get innovation. That's how you make medicines more affordable.
It's like finding that balance, right? Letting the climbers choose their routes, but making sure they've got safety measures in place. Exactly. And then you've got this whole concept of TRIPS flexibilities. Nepal, they've got a real opportunity there. They can use those provisions to boost local production of those affordable medicines. They could even become a source for those specialized treatments.
It's like finding a hidden trail, a trail that leads to a whole new view. And this isn't just about the economics of it all, it's about the health and well-being of the Nepali people.
You're right, it's bigger than that. If Nepal can really navigate these challenges, it could mean better access to healthcare, quality healthcare for millions of people. That's a goal worth fighting for.
It really is, and it brings us back to that bigger conversation, the one about global health equity. Nepal's journey in this pharmaceutical world, it's not just their story, it's part of a bigger story. A story about making sure everyone, everywhere, has access to the medicines they need.
That's a great way to put it. So as you continue to learn about this market, keep those bigger questions in mind. How can Nepal find that balance, economic growth, while taking care of its people? How can they use their position to contribute to global health solutions?
It's not just about analyzing the market, it's about remembering the human element, the impact these decisions have on real people's lives.
Well said. Think about it this way. We talked about Bangladesh as a model for success, but what if Nepal? What if they could forge their own path?
Interesting thought. What if they took inspiration from Bangladesh? Yeah, but also found their own solutions. Solutions that are uniquely suited to their strengths, to their needs.
Exactly. What if they could create a path that not only benefits Nepal, but also inspires other countries facing similar challenges?
That's a great question for listeners to ponder. It really highlights the potential that Nepal has to be a leader, not just a follower, in the world of pharmaceuticals.
I think so too. It's a journey full of possibilities.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, isn't it? We're not just here to present the facts. We want you to think critically, ask those tough questions, and explore the possibilities. So dive deep, everyone, and see what you discover.